The Islamic State wants nuclear weapons. SkyWatchTV News for Wednesday, September 30th, 2015. I'm Derek Gilbert. This bit of disturbing news comes from a German war correspondent named Jürgen Todenhofer. He successfully embedded with the Islamic State for about a week and a half and has published a book, Inside IS, 10 Days with the Islamic State. Todenhofer says the group hopes to kill several hundred million people in the West. It says that governments in the West are drastically underestimating the strength of the Islamic State. IS, he points out, controls an area of land that's larger than the United Kingdom, and he says that their fighters have an almost ecstatic enthusiasm that he's never seen before in a war zone. Not surprising, from a Christian perspective, this is what we would call the influence of demons. Now, we have to remind you that the U.S. Army's Central Command is still being investigated on reports that they changed the reports of intelligence analysts about the strength of the Islamic State. Those reports that suggested that American airstrikes were ineffective were sent back to analysts by senior officers who demanded more footnotes and more details to justify their conclusions. Reports that showed that the airstrikes were having an effect in degrading the capabilities of the IS were passed along to the Pentagon with few or no changes at all. Some of the analysts at CENTCOM said that they felt bullied by senior officials into reaching conclusions that matched the official line of the Obama administration that airstrikes alone would be enough to defeat and destroy the Islamic State. Pentagon strategist Colonel Bob McGinnis, author of the forthcoming book, Never Submit, told us last week that career military men understood that airstrikes alone would never do the job. So we have a strange and a very uncomfortable situation in the cradle of the Judeo-Christian world. The area controlled by the Islamic State is essentially the birthplace of the Judeo-Christian world. It's the area from which Abram was called by Yahweh, renamed Abraham, and promised that he would become the father of many nations. And yet Christians and Jews who've lived in that area for roughly 3,000 years are being driven out or killed by these servants of a lesser God. And the shameful truth is that the United States created and armed this group, this apocalyptic death cult. They were shipped weapons from the disbanded Libyan army after the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2012. And the Defense Intelligence Agency in the fall of 2012, according to documents obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, told the White House that arming the rebels in Syria, as we were doing, would lead to the creation of a radical Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, with devastating consequences for the stability of the nation, of both of those nations, in fact. And the question is, what now? It appears that Russian President Vladimir Putin has grabbed the initiative by moving troops into Syria and declaring the Islamic State the enemy. He makes it difficult for the U.S. and NATO to claim the moral high ground, if in fact we ever had it. It also restricts our military options inside Syria and especially impacts Israel's ability to stop the flow of weapons from Iran through Syria to Hezbollah, like those 75 heavy tanks I mentioned earlier this week, Hezbollah's first armored division, which no doubt will someday be put to use against Israel. Now, at the United Nations this week, President Obama offered no clear path forward for the West in Syria, instead just scolded Russia for its intervention there as well as its intervention in Ukraine, conveniently neglecting to mention that the United States Department of State essentially coordinated the coup in Ukraine that toppled former President Viktor Yanukovych, who just coincidentally was friendly to Russia. So the world faces a refugee crisis, especially in Europe, a flood of people fleeing the Middle East war zone for Europe and points west. This is understandable. If I were a parent, I'd want to get out of there as well, a parent of small children, that is. Except that there are troubling reports coming from points in Europe that suggest that the percentage of young able-bodied men is a lot higher than one would expect among the refugees, which raises questions of whether these are actually refugees fleeing a war zone or migrants, in other words, a slow-motion invasion. And in light of that, it's worth revisiting a piece from earlier this year, a news item from March. And by the way, we need to point out that a lot of these refugees are traveling across the Mediterranean in boats, landing in Greece, and then being passed through from Greece to other points inside the Eurozone. At the height of the Greek debt crisis, when Europe was debating what to do about Greece, Defense Minister Panos Kamenos warned that if Greece was forced out of the Eurozone, it would be forced to flood Europe with migrants because they would no longer be able to care for all of these refugees, and that some of these migrants just might include some refugees from the Islamic State. Now, his comments followed a threat from the foreign minister of Greece, who said that tens of millions of immigrants and thousands of jihadists would be sent through to the rest of Europe if negotiations over a Greek bailout failed, that those migrants would get papers to pass them straight through to Berlin. So is it possible that this crisis in Europe is actually the revenge of the Greeks, that they followed through on their threats? And should we in the U.S. and Canada be concerned by the comments of Colonel Bob McGinnis last week, that the Islamic State is taking advantage of this crisis, this turmoil, to infiltrate Europe and North America? I received some email after my comments about Pope Francis' homily in Philadelphia. Monday, I talked about what I described the gospel of niceness. He seemed to focus on small blessings such as a warm supper or a hug before bedtime at the end of a long day. Nice things, to be sure, but not really the gospel message. Emails asked me why I didn't comment about Pope Francis' remarks about the failure of the cross. Well, bear in mind, we're seeing an English translation of his actual remarks. The English translation reads, and I quote, "The cross shows us a different way of measuring success. Ours is to plant the seeds. God sees to the fruit of our labors. And if at times our efforts and works seem to fail and not produce fruit, we need to remember that we are followers of Jesus Christ. And his life, humanly speaking, ended in failure, the failure of the cross." End quote. Now, I gave him the benefit of the doubt because even the apostles didn't understand what the cross was about while they were with Jesus. In fact, if you turn to Acts chapter 1, you'll see that the apostles, after 40 days with the risen Christ, were still asking him, essentially, will you restore the kingdom to Israel now? Acts 1, verse 6. Now, having said that, Pope Francis should, at the very least, be enough of a politician to know that those remarks would be misunderstood at best. The cross was not a failure. The cross was the whole purpose of Jesus' mission on planet Earth. His life was always going to culminate at the cross. At worst, if Pope Francis really meant that the cross was a failure because it interrupted his ministry on earth, then the Pope, as I said Monday, has, in fact, missed the point of the gospel. And more than that, he's missed the point of the supernatural war for our souls. And a follow-up on yesterday's story, I mentioned NASA's big revelation Monday of flowing water on Mars. Ridley Scott, director of the forthcoming Matt Damon film The Martian, tells us that he knew about flowing water on Mars 2 months ago. How? NASA told him. So if NASA told Ridley Scott about this 2 months ago, why did they wait to tell the rest of us until Monday of this week? Could it be that NASA wanted to coordinate that release with the release of the Matt Damon movie, The Martian, which, not coincidentally, opens in theaters here in the United States this coming Friday? Why, you'd almost think that NASA is putting together a propaganda campaign to get more funding from Congress. You think? SkyWatch TV last night, our final in the series of programs about National Preparedness Month. Carl Gallup's the author of Be Thou Prepared, was our guest and gave us some very good reasons for Christians to prepare. If you missed the program as it aired on the Christian Television Network, you can see it today on our Roku channel. If you have a Roku account, log on, search for the SkyWatch TV channel in the Roku channel store and give us an ad. We've also got complete instructions at skywatchtv.com/Roku. Now, we're about into October, just a few weeks away from the 10th Annual Strategic Perspectives Conference at Koinonia Institute. That's Chuck Missler's ministry. Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. The Coeur d'Alene Resort is the site. October 23rd through the 25th are the dates. More information on the speakers list, which includes our friend Gary Stearman from Prophecy Watchers and future guests on SkyWatch TV, Joel Richardson and Colonel Bob McGinnis. You'll find all that information and a place to register at koinoniainstitute.org. Next summer, we're looking forward to the Rocky Mountain International Conference. 25 speakers on prophecy. Well, 24 learned speakers and me. That is July 15th through the 17th at Colorado Springs. Registration opens in just a couple of weeks, October 13th. More information online at prophecywatchers.com. We appreciate your comments, questions, and suggestions. Please send those to dgilbert@skywatchtv.com. Thank you for watching. As we keep watch, I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is SkyWatch TV.